I still remember that night like it happened yesterday. The air was heavy, thick with the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Outside, the rain poured down, tracing long silver lines across the kitchen window. Inside, I was staring at the man I had loved for 20 years, and realizing I didn't know him at all anymore. His name was Mark, my husband, my partner, my whole world, or at least, that's what I thought he was. He stood across the kitchen table, arms crossed, eyes cold and sharp like the blade of a knife. He had that smirk, the one that always made me feel small, like a child who'd done something wrong. "You'll never survive without me," he said, his voice cutting through the storm outside, and just like that, something inside me broke. I had heard many cruel things from him before. Words meant to wound, meant to remind me that everything I had, the house, the bills, even my own peace, existed because he allowed it. But that sentence, it didn't just hurt. It freed something inside me. For years, I had built my life around Mark. He liked to say he made me. He took credit for the meals I cooked, the garden I planted, the children I raised, and the job I gave up to keep his world running. And somewhere along the way, I started to believe him. I believed I couldn't live without him, that I was too weak, too lost, too dependent to survive alone. But when he said those words that night, "You'll never survive without me," I realized something. He wasn't describing me. He was describing his fear. Because deep down, he knew the moment I stopped believing him, I'd stop needing him. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of rain still tapping against the window. Mark had already left for work. His mug was in the sink, a dark ring of coffee clinging to the sides. He'd left the newspaper open on the table, an article about some local business awards. There was a picture of him on the front page, shaking hands with the mayor. Mark Walters, Community Leader of the Year. I stared at that photo for a long time. There he was, the man everyone admired, the man everyone thought was charming, successful, generous. If only they knew. If only they saw what he was like when the doors closed. I thought back to the early years when we first met. He wasn't always cruel. He used to bring me flowers, surprise me with road trips, hold me when I cried. He used to look at me like I was his whole world. But love that burns too fast often turns to ashes. It started small, the little corrections, the soft insults disguised as jokes. "You'd look prettier if you lost a little weight." "You're not really good with money, let me handle it." "You're lucky I put up with your moods." I laughed them off at first, told myself he was joking, but over time, the jokes became rules, the rules became control, and control became a cage. That night, the night he said those words, I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't even argue, I just stared at him, and for the first time, I saw the truth. He wasn't my protector. He was my prison, and I had been decorating my own cage, calling it love. When he left the room, I walked to the mirror in the hallway. I looked at myself, my tired eyes, my wrinkled hands, the woman I'd become. When did I disappear? When did I stop being me? The woman who used to paint, who used to dance in the kitchen, who used to laugh so loud the neighbors would join in, where did she go? I touched the mirror and whispered, "I'm still here." And that's when I decided I would leave. It wasn't easy. Leaving never is, especially when you've built your entire world around someone else's approval. I started planning quietly. I gathered the courage like small pebbles in my pocket. One every day until I had enough to build a path out. I opened a small bank account under my maiden name. I started saving grocery money, a few dollars here and there. I told friends I was visiting family when I went to look at apartments. but the fear never left. Every night I would lie awake, hearing his voice in my head, "You'll never survive without me." Sometimes I almost believed him. Sometimes I'd cry myself to sleep, wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. But then I'd think of that mirror, that whisper, that small flicker of the woman I used to be, and I'd remind myself, I'm not leaving him because I stopped loving him. I'm leaving because I finally started loving myself. The day I left, the sky was clear. The rain had finally stopped. I packed one suitcase, just the essentials: clothes, photos of the kids, my mother's necklace, and my journal. I didn't leave a note. I didn't owe him an explanation. I drove out of that driveway with shaking hands, tears blurring my vision. Every mile that passed felt like a piece of me coming back to life. The road stretched long and empty, just me, the hum of the tires, and the sound of my own breathing. For the first time in years, I wasn't scared. I was free. But freedom has a price, and I was about to learn just how high that price would be. He said I'd never survive without him. But survival isn't just about breathing. It's about remembering who you are when someone tries to erase you. And I was ready to remember. The first night alone felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into darkness, and realizing there was no one behind me to catch me if I fell. The motel room I'd found was small, the kind that smelled faintly of bleach and loneliness. The wallpaper peeled near the corners, and the old air conditioner rattled like it was fighting for its last breath. But to me, it was freedom. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the single suitcase that held everything I owned. My hands were trembling, though I wasn't sure if it was from fear or relief. Outside, the crickets sang, and in the distance I could hear the faint hum of passing cars. Every sound reminded me that the world was still moving, even if my life had stopped and restarted in one day. I turned off the light and lay down, but sleep didn't come. Every creak made me flinch. Every shadow on the wall looked like him. I kept hearing his voice in my head, calm, confident, cruel. "You'll come crawling back. You can't make it without me." But I didn't go back. I pulled the thin blanket tighter around me and whispered, "Watch me." The next morning, I woke to sunlight leaking through the blinds. My body ached from the cheap mattress, but there was something new in me, a quiet kind of peace. I didn't have a plan, not really, just a small pile of cash, my old car, and a phone filled with contacts I wasn't sure I could trust anymore. I sat at the little table by the window and made a list on the back of a receipt. Find a job. Find a place. Don't go back. 3 simple lines, but they felt like a map to somewhere I'd never been before, my own life. The first few days were a blur. I drove around town applying anywhere that would take me. Diners, gas stations, cleaning services. Most people just glanced at me and shook their heads. "No openings right now?" they said. Some looked at my wedding ring and smiled politely, assuming I was one of those women who didn't need a job. I wanted to tell them I needed it more than anything. On the 4th day, I found a "Help Wanted" sign in the window of a small diner off Route 9. The place smelled like coffee and burnt toast, and the woman behind the counter had kind eyes and tired hands. Her name was Linda. She asked if I had any experience, and I told her I used to help at church events, bake sales, anything really. She looked me over, my wrinkled blouse, my nervous smile, and said, "You can start tomorrow." I thanked her, though the words caught in my throat. I don't think she knew she had just saved me. That night, I sat in my car outside the diner long after it closed. The neon sign buzzed overhead, flickering between open and opie. I watched it and thought, maybe that's me. Not broken, just flickering, trying to stay lit. The first shift was hard. My hands shook when I carried coffee to the customers. My feet ached, my back burned, and every mistake made my heart race with panic. I could almost hear Mark's voice, "You can't even do this right." But then I heard someone else, Linda, calling from behind the counter, "You're doing fine, honey. Everyone spills coffee their first day." It was such a small kindness, but it felt like sunlight after years of shade. Days turned into weeks. I started getting the hang of it, remembering orders, greeting regulars by name. One old man, Henry, came in every morning at 7 a.m. and ordered the same thing, black coffee and apple pie. He'd always say, "You remind me of my late wife." She had that same stubborn look in her eyes. I didn't know what he meant, but it made me smile. In the evenings, I'd drive back to my little rented room above a hardware store. It wasn't much, just a bed, a small stove, and a window that looked out over the street. But it was mine. No shouting, no fear, just me and the soft hum of the town settling in for the night. Some nights I cried, not because I missed him, but because I was learning how to live without being told who I was. The silence used to scare me. Now it began to heal me. But word travels fast in small towns. One afternoon, Linda came over with a newspaper in her hand. She laid it on the counter in front of me. There was Mark's face again, smiling that same practiced smile. The article read, "Local businessman expands to new territories." My stomach turned. He was doing better than ever. At least that's how it looked. The thought stung. He'd moved on, probably telling everyone I'd lost my mind or had a breakdown. Maybe he was already seeing someone else. I wanted to slam the paper shut, but instead I took a deep breath and smiled. Let him have his articles, his trophies, his image. I was building something real, something that didn't need applause to exist. Still, I couldn't escape the past so easily. Some nights, I'd see couples in the diner, laughing, holding hands, and it would hit me, the loneliness. I had traded safety for solitude, and sometimes that hurt more than I expected. One evening, after closing, Linda asked if I wanted to stay for coffee. She didn't ask questions, didn't pry. We sat there, two women in a quiet diner, sharing silence and understanding. She finally said, "Sometimes you gotta lose everything before you can see what you were carrying all along." Her words stayed with me. I started painting again. Just small canvases at first. Flowers, sunsets, things I hadn't noticed in years. I sold one at the local market for $20, and when the buyer walked away, I cried behind my booth. Not because of the money, but because someone wanted something I made. That night, I drove home with the windows down. The wind tangled my hair, and for the first time, I sang along to the radio. It felt strange, my voice rusty and real, filling the car. I laughed at myself and didn't care who saw. Freedom wasn't glamorous. It was messy, lonely, exhausting, but it was mine. And though I didn't know it then, every step I took away from him was taking me closer to a life I never thought I could have. He was wrong. I was surviving. Maybe not gracefully, not perfectly, but I was still standing. And that was more than he ever expected of me. The first real test came on a Tuesday morning, the kind that starts off so normal you'd never guess how quickly it would fall apart. I arrived at the diner just after sunrise, the sky a pale gold, my hands still smelling faintly of turpentine from the painting I'd worked on the night before. The air felt calm, peaceful. I should have known better. By noon, the diner was full. The coffee was flowing, the grill sizzling, and Linda was in the back checking supplies. I was refilling sugar jars when a familiar voice froze me in place. Well, I'll be damned. It was Mark. I didn't turn around right away. My heart started pounding so hard I thought the sugar jar would slip from my hand. I forced a smile and faced him. He stood near the door, wearing that same expensive suit, his gold watch catching the light, his smirk sharp enough to cut glass. "Didn't think I'd find you here," he said, looking me up and down like I was something he'd outgrown. "A diner waitress? That's a long fall, even for you." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Hi, Mark." He laughed softly like my calmness was some kind of act. "You look different. Tired. Guess life without me isn't as easy as you thought." Every word was meant to sting, to pull me back into that place where I felt small. I could feel every customer's eyes on me. My face burned, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm doing fine," I said. He leaned in a little. "Fine? This is what you call fine? Serving people eggs and coffee? You could have had everything, but you threw it away because of some silly pride." For a second, I almost broke. His voice carried all the old poison, all the memories of fear and silence. But then I looked past him, at Linda watching from the kitchen window, at Henry reading his newspaper in his usual booth, at the little world I'd built brick by brick. "No," I said quietly. "You took everything, Mark. I'm just starting to take it back." His smirk faltered. Just a flicker, but I saw it. He straightened his jacket, gave a fake laugh, and turned toward the door. "You'll come crawling back," he said. "You always do." Then he left. When the door shut behind him, the room felt like it could finally breathe again. I stood there, my knees trembling, and before I knew it, Linda's hand was on my shoulder. She didn't say anything, just gave it a gentle squeeze. That small act, it steadied me. I worked through the rest of the day on autopilot. My smile didn't quite reach my eyes, but I kept moving, pouring coffee, clearing plates, saying, "Have a nice day," like nothing had happened. But inside, something was burning. Not fear, not shame. Something stronger. That night, I went home and cried harder than I had in months. It wasn't weakness this time. It was release. For the first time, I cried not because I missed him, but because I didn't. The next morning, when I opened my front door, there was an envelope sitting on the floor. No name, no address. Just my name written in that same slanted handwriting I'd seen on birthday cards and angry notes for years. My stomach twisted. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It said, "You took money from me when you left. I'll make sure everyone knows." My breath caught. I hadn't taken a cent, not his money. The account I'd opened had been built from grocery savings, babysitting cash, little things I'd scraped together. But he didn't need truth. He needed control. By noon that day, I heard whispers. Someone at the grocery store avoided my eyes. Another woman from church didn't return my wave. That's how small towns work. Truth doesn't matter when gossip is easier to believe. The humiliation hit me like a wave. For a few days, I could barely walk through town without feeling every stare. Linda tried to defend me, but even she couldn't silence the whispers completely. "You know how people are," she said softly. "They'll move on to someone else soon." But I couldn't hide forever. I went to work, head held high, even when I could feel the judgment in the air. Then one evening, a man in a suit came into the diner. He was one of Mark's business associates. I recognized him right away. He sat at the counter, ordered coffee, and said, "He told me you'd fallen apart. Said you might be dangerous." I looked him straight in the eye and said, "He's right about one thing. I am dangerous to anyone who thinks they can break me again." He didn't come back after that. It was in those weeks, the hardest ones, that I began to understand something I never had before. People can take your money, your reputation, your comfort, but they can't take your truth. Not unless you give it to them. So I painted. Every night, I poured everything I couldn't say into the canvas. Pain became color, anger became shape, and for the first time, I saw beauty in the mess of it all. A month later, Linda convinced me to show my work at the local fair. I almost said no, terrified of seeing those same faces that had turned away from me, but she said, "You don't paint for them, honey. You paint for you." So I went. I set up my small table, nervous hands arranging each painting. Small things, really. A sunrise over the lake, a field of yellow flowers, a woman standing alone on a bridge. People walked by, glanced, nodded politely. I was about to start packing up when a woman stopped. She stared at one of the paintings for a long time, the one of the bridge. Then she looked at me and said, "That's how I feel every morning before I leave the house." Her voice trembled. She bought it. And before she walked away, she whispered, "Thank you." I stood there for a long time after she left, the money folded in my hand, my heart so full it hurt. It wasn't about the sale. It was about connection. I had spoken through my pain, and someone had heard me. When I got home that night, I looked in the mirror again. The woman staring back wasn't scared anymore. She was tired, yes, bruised by life, certainly, but her eyes were alive again. Mark's lies had spread, and people had judged. But I hadn't fallen apart. I was still standing, stronger, steadier, and more certain than ever that my life was finally my own. I had faced his world's whispers and come out the other side, and deep down I knew this was only the beginning of my rise. I didn't know it then, but that night, after the fair, after that woman thanked me, something inside me shifted for good. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was beginning to live. Every morning before work, I painted. Every night after my shift, I painted again. The walls of my little room were covered in canvases, flowers, oceans, faces, memories. They were all pieces of me that I had buried for years under Mark's voice. When the local art shop owner, a gentle old man named Mr. Carter, noticed my work at the fair, he offered to display 2 of my paintings in his window. "You've got something real here," he said. "People like real." I thanked him, though I wasn't sure I believed him. But a week later, both paintings sold. I cried that night. Not out of sadness, not out of joy exactly, but out of a strange mix of relief and disbelief. I had created something that mattered, something that was mine. Word spread slowly. People who once whispered about me started asking for custom pieces. I worked until my fingers cramped and my eyes blurred, but I didn't care. The more I worked, the less I thought about Mark. And yet, every brushstroke felt like quiet revenge. Every painting that sold was a reminder that I could survive without him, and not just survive, but thrive. But life, I've learned, always tests your resolve when you start to rise. One Friday afternoon, a man came into the diner holding one of my flyers. "You the artist?" he asked. I nodded cautiously. He smiled and said, "We're hosting an art exhibit downtown next month, local talent showcase. You should submit your work." Me? An exhibit? I almost laughed, but he pressed on, handing me the form. "You've got a story, and people love stories." That night, I sat by my window, staring at the form. Fear and excitement wrestled inside me. Could I really stand in front of people, strangers, and let them see my work, my pain, my truth? What if they laughed? What if Mark showed up? But then I remembered something Linda once said. "You can't keep hiding from the fire and expect to see the light." So I filled out the form. For weeks, I prepared. Linda helped me pick my best pieces. She even loaned me her old car to bring them downtown. Henry from the diner carved wooden frames for me, insisting on doing it for free. "Every queen needs a throne," he said with a wink. When the night of the exhibit finally came, I wore a simple blue dress I found at a thrift store. Nothing fancy, but it made me feel like me. The gallery was full of people, laughter, conversation, the soft echo of jazz music filling the room. Then I saw him, Mark. He stood across the room looking at my paintings, his expression unreadable. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to breathe. He had no power here, not anymore. He walked over, his eyes scanning my work. "You did all this?" he asked, as if it were impossible. "Yes," I said, "every piece." He gave a short laugh. "Funny, I always told you that you were wasting your time with that painting hobby. Guess you finally proved me wrong." I met his gaze. "I've been proving you wrong a lot lately." His jaw tightened, but he smiled. That same practiced, charming smile that used to fool everyone. "Well, congratulations," he said. "It's cute. I suppose we all find our little distractions." I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because just then the event organizer walked up and said, "Excuse me, ma'am, your painting just sold, the one titled Freedom in Blue. A collector bought it for $2,000. Mark's smile froze. I turned back to him, my voice steady. "Some distractions pay off." He didn't say another word. He just stared at me for a long second, then walked away. And as he disappeared into the crowd, I felt lighter, like the last chain had finally fallen off. That night, as I loaded the remaining paintings into the car, I caught my reflection in the window. The woman staring back wasn't the broken version of me he left behind. She was stronger, braver, radiant in a quiet way. But life wasn't done yet. A few weeks later, I received a call from a journalist who wanted to feature local women entrepreneurs for a community column. She'd seen my work at the exhibit and asked if she could include my story. My first instinct was to say no. I didn't want attention, especially if it could attract Mark again. But something inside me whispered, "This is your voice now. Use it." So I agreed. The article was simple. A photo of me standing beside one of my paintings, the headline reading, "From Broken to Brave, How One Woman Found Strength Through Art." It spread quickly. Friends, neighbors, even strangers came into the diner just to tell me how much it inspired them. One woman said, "Your story gave me the courage to leave a man who kept telling me I couldn't make it alone." That day, I realized something powerful. My pain wasn't wasted. It had become someone else's lifeline. Mark must have seen the article, because a week later, he called. I stared at the phone for a long time before answering. "You've really made a name for yourself," he said, his tone laced with false warmth. "I'm happy for you." I didn't reply. I just listened. Then his voice changed, lower, colder. "Don't think this makes you better than me?" I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "I don't need to be better than you, Mark. I just needed to be free from you." There was silence on the other end. Then he hung up. I sat there for a long while, the phone still in my hand, and felt a wave of peace wash over me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of him. Not his words, not his power, not his lies. That night I painted something new. A woman standing in a field of fire, untouched by the flames, eyes closed, face lifted to the wind. I called it resilience. When I finished, I stepped back and whispered to myself, "He said I'd never survive without him, but I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living." And deep down, I knew. My revenge wasn't about destroying him. It was about becoming everything he said I couldn't be. It's strange how time works once you stop living in fear. Weeks melted into months, and each one brought a new version of me I didn't recognize, but I liked her. She was steady, confident, untouched by the ghosts that used to whisper in her ear. After that article came out, my art business grew faster than I could have imagined. Orders came in from nearby towns. People wanted my paintings for their homes, cafes, even offices. I had to quit the diner. Henry hugged me so tight when I told him, like a proud father watching his daughter graduate from life's hardest school. I rented a small studio space downtown with big windows that flooded the room with morning light. Every day I'd open those blinds and feel the sun kiss my face like it was saying, "You made it out." I painted for hours, lost in the music, the smell of acrylic, the rhythm of my heartbeat sinking with every brushstroke. But success didn't come without whispers. Some people in town still talked about me, though now their gossip had changed tones. "Did you hear about her?" they'd say. "Mark's ex-wife. She's doing really well for herself now." I'd hear it at the grocery store, at the gas station, even walking down Main Street. But instead of shrinking away like before, I held my head high. Their words no longer hurt. They were proof of how far I'd come. Then one day, I saw him again. Mark was standing outside the hardware store, looking older, worn down. His once perfectly pressed shirt was wrinkled. The spark in his eyes had dulled. He didn't see me at first, but when he did, his expression flickered between pride and envy. "Wow," he said, forcing a smile. "You look different." "I am," I replied simply. We stood in silence for a moment, the past hanging heavy between us. He finally spoke again. "I heard your business is doing well. That's good. Really good." There was something hollow in his voice, like he was swallowing pieces of his own regret. Then he asked, "Do you ever think about us?" I looked him straight in the eye. "I used to. But now, I just think about who I became because of what we went through." He nodded, his gaze falling to the ground. "I guess I didn't realize what I had." I didn't say it out loud, but the truth was clear. He never really had me. He only held me down. That night I went home and opened my journal, the same one where I used to scribble broken thoughts after crying myself to sleep. I flipped to a blank page and wrote, "Freedom doesn't start when you leave someone. It starts when you stop believing you need their approval to exist." From that moment, things accelerated. My paintings caught the attention of a regional art magazine. They did a feature titled, "The Woman Who Painted Her Pain into Power." It went viral locally, then nationally. Orders flooded in from places I'd never even visited: Chicago, Dallas, even New York. I hired 2 assistants to help with packaging and commissions. My studio became a small sanctuary of creation and laughter. Some days I'd just sit in the middle of it all, watching the light dance across my canvases and whisper, "Thank you." Not to Mark, not to fate, but to the woman I refused to give up on. One evening, as I was closing up the studio, Linda dropped by. She had that knowing smile, the one she used to wear back when she'd remind me I deserved more. "You've come a long way, honey," she said, looking around the studio. "Do you realize what you've built?" I laughed softly. "Sometimes I still can't believe it." She touched my arm. "Believe it. And remember, your success isn't revenge, it's justice." Those words hit deep. Because for the longest time, I thought proving Mark wrong was my victory. But now, I saw it clearly. The real victory was peace. Still, fate has a funny way of looping back, just to show you how much you've grown. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. When I answered, I heard Mark's voice again. This time it was trembling. "I didn't know who else to call," he said quietly. "My business went under. The house is gone. I messed up. For a second, I didn't know what to say. The man who once told me I'd never survive without him was now the one drowning. "I'm sorry, Mark," I finally said, my tone calm but firm. "But I can't help you. You'll survive. You always said you were the strong one, remember?" He didn't answer right away. Then came a weak laugh. "Yeah, I remember." Before he hung up, he whispered, "You really proved me wrong, didn't you?" After the call, I sat in silence for a long time. I didn't feel satisfaction or anger, just a quiet, unshakable peace. Later that week, I received an invitation from a gallery in New York. They wanted to showcase my collection titled Unbroken. It was a series of paintings that told my story through color, shadow, and light. I stared at the letter, tears welling up. The girl who once packed her life into trash bags and drove off into the night was now being invited to show her art to the world. When the night of the New York show arrived, I stood in that grand hall, surrounded by faces I didn't know, but who somehow knew me through my work. Cameras flashed. Strangers shook my hand. People spoke my name with admiration. And as I looked at my largest painting, a woman walking through a storm, hair wild, eyes fierce, I whispered under my breath, "You said I'd never survive without you. But look at me now." I didn't hate him anymore. I didn't need to. The storm he left me in had taught me how to dance in the rain. When the crowd applauded, it wasn't just for my art. It was for every woman who's ever been told she couldn't make it on her own. It was for every soul who dared to rebuild from ashes. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of everything I was meant to be. When success found me, I didn't chase it. I just kept walking toward peace, and it followed. My studio thrived, my name began to travel, and for the first time, I woke up each morning with no dread, no fear, no voice telling me I wasn't enough. But life has a way of showing us full circles. One evening as I was leaving my studio, I ran into Mr. Carter, the old art shop owner who gave me my first chance. He looked troubled. "You remember Mark?" he asked gently. I nodded. "He's not doing well. Lost everything. Drinking too much. Folks say he's living in one of those roadside motels out by the highway." I felt my chest tighten for a moment, not out of love or pity, but from the ghost of a memory. Once upon a time, I would have run to save him. But that woman no longer existed. Days passed, and I kept painting, but Mark's image lingered in my mind. Not because I missed him, but because I wondered how someone could fall so far and never learn to rise. A week later, fate decided to put us face to face again. I had just finished setting up a small charity exhibit in town, raising funds for women escaping domestic situations. I was standing near the entrance greeting guests when I saw him, thin, unshaven, his once neatly combed hair now gray and wild. He stood outside the glass doors for a long time before finally walking in. People turned to look. Whispers began. But I didn't move. I waited. When he reached me, he looked smaller somehow, not in height, but in spirit. "You look happy," he said, his voice cracked and tired. "I am," I replied quietly. He gave a small, broken laugh. "Guess I was wrong about a lot of things." I nodded. "Yes, you were." He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "I didn't call to ask for help before because I wanted pity. I called because I didn't know who else would even answer. You were always kind." "I was," I said, "but kindness doesn't mean staying where I was dying." He nodded slowly, shame in every movement. "I destroyed everything. The business, my family, my peace. I don't even recognize myself anymore." There was silence between us, a silence filled with years of pain, betrayal, and healing. Then he asked, almost in a whisper, Do you hate me? I thought about it. Once I had, deeply. But now, standing there, seeing the man who once held power over me reduced by his own arrogance, I felt only distance. No, I said softly, I don't hate you. Hating you would mean you still have power over me, and you don't. Tears welled in his eyes, and for a brief second, I saw the man I once loved, the one before the cruelty, before the control. You're stronger than I ever was, he said. I had to be, I answered. You made sure of that. He nodded once, then turned to leave. But before he reached the door, he stopped and said, I hope one day you can forgive me. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Forgiveness wasn't something I needed to give him. It was something I had already given myself. After he left, Linda came up behind me. You okay? She asked. I took a deep breath and smiled faintly. Yeah, I think I finally am. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I was upset, but because I realized something profound. Mark's downfall wasn't my victory. My victory was standing there, face to face with him, and feeling nothing but peace. The next morning, I drove out to the old motel by the highway. I didn't go inside, didn't speak to him. I just left an envelope at the front desk. Inside it was a painting, a small one I'd made years ago but never sold. It showed a wilted flower pushing through concrete, reaching toward the light. On the back, I wrote only one sentence. You said I'd never survive without you. But we both did, just differently. A few months later, I heard he'd moved away, probably chasing another chance somewhere else. I didn't ask where, and I didn't need to know. Some stories are meant to end quietly. Meanwhile, my world kept expanding. The New York Gallery show had led to another in Los Angeles, and then another in Chicago. My paintings were now more than art. They were symbols of resilience. Women would write to me from all over, saying my story gave them strength to leave, to heal, to live. I once thought revenge was about watching him fail. But true revenge, I realized, is living beautifully when someone swore you couldn't. Every scar, every sleepless night, every tear, it all built me into someone new. I wasn't defined by what he said or did. I was defined by how I rose after. When I stood on stage at a women's conference months later, sharing my journey, I ended with these words. He told me I'd never survive without him. But survival isn't enough. I didn't just survive. I became everything he said I couldn't be, and that, my friends, is freedom. The crowd rose in applause. Cameras flashed. But all I could see in that moment was the younger version of myself, the scared woman packing her bags in the middle of the night. I whispered to her in my mind, "You did it. You made it." And as the lights dimmed, I knew my story wasn't about Mark anymore. It was about me. And about every woman who has ever been told she was nothing without someone else. The night before my biggest art show, I stood in the quiet of my studio, surrounded by canvases that told my story without words. Each stroke carried a piece of the woman I used to be, shattered, frightened, uncertain. But as I looked around, I realized that none of those pieces were broken anymore. They had all been transformed into something radiant. The exhibit was titled Rebirth. It wasn't about pain anymore. It was about transformation, about the beauty that blooms after destruction, about every woman who has ever crawled through darkness and found her own light on the other side. The next morning, I arrived at the gallery early. The sun was rising, spilling golden light across the street, and for a moment, I just stood there, breathing it in. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't afraid. I was ready. By evening, the gallery was filled with people. critics, collectors, and everyday women who had heard my story. There were mothers, daughters, survivors, dreamers, and when I stepped onto the small stage to speak, a hush fell over the room. I smiled and said, "A few years ago, someone told me I'd never survive without him, and for a long time, I believed it. I believed that my worth depended on being loved, even if it hurt. I believed I was too weak to stand on my own." I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of women who understood that pain. But what I learned is this: we don't discover our strength in comfort. We discover it in the fire. And when you walk through that fire, you don't come out the same. You come out stronger, brighter, unstoppable. The crowd was silent. Some wiped tears. Others nodded with quiet understanding. I continued. He thought I'd fall apart without him. But what he didn't realize was that sometimes, when you lose everything, you finally make room for who you're meant to become. Applause rippled through the crowd. Soft at first, then thunderous. It echoed off the walls like a heartbeat. After the event, as people lined up to talk to me, a young woman approached. She looked about 20, eyes swollen from crying. She said, "Your story, it saved me. I was going to go back to him tonight, but now I won't." I held her hands in mine and whispered, "You don't need anyone who makes you smaller just so they can feel bigger. You are enough." That moment, right there, was my true success. Not the fame, not the sales, not the applause, but knowing that my story, born from pain, could light the way for someone else. Weeks later, I received a letter. The handwriting was shaky, but familiar. It was from Mark. He wrote, "I saw your interview on TV. You were incredible. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say thank you for surviving, for proving that maybe deep down we both could change. Take care, always. Mark." I folded the letter gently and placed it in an old box, the same one where I kept mementos from my past. A life, not as a reminder of him, but as proof of how far I'd come. Then I picked up a blank canvas, white, empty, waiting. For the first time, I wasn't painting to heal. I was painting to celebrate. My brush moved freely. No plan, no fear, no sadness, just joy. I painted a sunrise bursting over a calm ocean. I called it freedom. A few months later, that very painting was auctioned for charity, raising enough money to open a small community center for women starting over. It became a place where they could learn skills, find jobs, and rebuild their lives. Every wall in that center held one of my paintings, not as decoration but as a reminder. You can rise from anything. The day the center opened, I stood outside, watching women walk in, some carrying children, some carrying only the weight of their past. I smiled, because I saw myself in all of them. One reporter asked, "If you could say one thing to the man who once told you you'd never survive without him, what would it be?" I looked straight into the camera and said, "Thank you. Because without that moment of cruelty, I might never have discovered my strength. You tried to break me, but you built my fire instead." That clip went viral overnight. Millions watched it. Comments poured in from around the world. Women shared their own stories, their own versions of survival. It wasn't just my story anymore. It was our story. Years later, when people asked how I found my strength, I'd smile and say, "Strength isn't found. It's remembered. It's always been there, waiting for you to believe in it." And sometimes, on quiet mornings, when the sun spills through my studio window just right, I catch a glimpse of my reflection in the glass. The woman staring back at me is calm, content, fearless. I whisper softly, "You were wrong, Mark. I didn't just survive without you. I became unstoppable." The wind carries my words out the window, as if to scatter them across the world, to every woman still standing at her own breaking point, wondering if she'll make it. And if she listens closely, she'll hear my voice whisper back, "Yes, you will. You always could." Because this isn't a story about heartbreak. It's a story about rebirth, a story about a woman who lost everything and gained herself. And that's the most beautiful survival of all.